first, the Dallas Cowboys, it's almost become funny at this point, collapse in the playoffs once again by a final score of 48-32 to the aforementioned Green Bay Packers. We are in a very weird space today with Dallas. And I find that we're in the same spot we were in to a certain extent last year, but really more so the year before that. And just by and large in the last 3 years that Dak has had 3 generally healthy seasons with Mike McCarthy as the head coach. Because everybody is calling for McCarthy's job today. He's uncreative. He had a bad game plan. More on that later in the show. And the defense is terrible, which they were. They gave up 48 points to the Packers. Packers team that scored 17 against Chicago last week. And it's all this. Jerry Jones doesn't know what he's doing. They can't draft a number 2 receiver. But it's Dak Prescott's fault. I mean, obviously, it's got to be on the quarterback. Quarterback gets the majority of the credit when the team wins. He gets the majority of the blame when they lose. And that's completely fair and justified regarding my man, Rain Dakota Prescott, who, I mean, look at statistical output, 3 touchdowns, 403 yards, completion percentage over 67% as well. But vast majority of those yards came in garbage time. Although I would argue maybe not so much garbage time. I mean, Dallas almost cut it to a 1-score game, but we can nitpick here and there. Passer rating at 89, okay. QBR of 43, below average. Dak played about a C plus-ish game. Not an F game like people are overreacting and casuals are trying to convince you, and certainly nobody on God's green earth is going to argue he had an A game. But this is where I get really irritated as I would call myself the unofficial president of the Dak Prescott Support Club. As a matter of fact, as a former Dallas Cowboys fan, I said back in 2020, when Dak went down with the injury, the ankle injury, don't want to rehash that. He didn't have a long-term contract, and I'm like, you know what? Screw Jerry Jones, screw the Cowboys. They did this man dirty. I'm out of here. I will pull for Dak. I will pull for whoever Dak plays for, but I will no longer be a Dallas Cowboys fan, maintain that to this day, and it is good to be a Pittsburgh Steelers fan relative to my days in Dallas. But that aside, part of the reason I've always supported Dak through thick and thin is because I've seen his ceiling. I've seen what he's capable of doing at the highest level. Again, did not play even close to an A-plus game yesterday. I will not make any excuses or mistakes about it. But in an unofficial segment of Carving Up the Context, which I do every Wednesday, this does not count as Carving Up the Context. I'll save that for Wednesday. This notion that Dak is the source of the Cowboys' problems. Folks, there's an old saying in professional sports. It's one of my favorites, that don't blame your best player for your biggest problems. And yes, Dak's the Cowboys' best player. Are we really gonna argue that today? Zach Martin's fading. Tyron Smith's still an excellent player. He's kind of fading into distant memory in terms of his ability. 13th year in the league he just completed, might retire. Micah Parsons is so elite. Saw this stat is this Next Gen Stats, I believe. Next Gen Stats, according to the National Football League, Micah Parsons was held to 1 pressure on 19 pass rushes. His only pressure came when he was unblocked. So essentially, Micah Parsons didn't show up. CeeDee Lamb had multiple drops, but had his moments from time to time. Dak's the Cowboys' best player. And the fact of the matter is, I'm hearing, 1 year left on Dak's contract. You got to consider moving on from him. More on why the Cowboys are in a tough position to do that in just a second. But oftentimes in sports, in life, and my Lord, is Twitter, X, whatever the heck it's called these days, is this not a perfect representation of this? Or is that a perfect representation about what I'm about to say? That the last thing that happened is the only thing that happened. So yes, the Dallas Cowboys are going to, we'll see if they do, but yeah, they're going to move off of a guy who, a few weeks when the MVP voting comes out and Lamar Jackson wins it, you know whose name's going to be below Lamar? Not Mahomes, not Burrow, not Josh Allen, not McCaffrey, TJ Watt, my man out of Pittsburgh, Myles Garrett, Tyreek Hill. It's going to be Dak Prescott. You're telling me a guy who led the league in touchdown passes and completion percentage and was top 5 in touchdown to interception ratio, only threw 9 this year, cut his interceptions almost in half in more games played, and led the Cowboys to another 12-win season without a legitimate number 2 receiver. Yeah, they're going to move off of him. That's going to fix their problems. Dallas, and I've often said this, and it's to a greater degree with Lamar Jackson, but I've also made the same case with Dak Prescott, that we often forget how Dallas is without Dak, as opposed to with him. With him, averaging This is since his rookie year, by the way. Averaging 27 points a game, 381 yards a game offensively. That ain't bad. Dak has a 99 passer rating. That's pretty good in general. That's including the bad year in 2017. And wins about 64% of his games. Again, this is including some of the rough stretches with Jason Garrett. Still, even the 8-8 year in 2019 still wins 64% of the games. Without Dak, they struggle to break 20, barely 21 points per game. 23 yards per game. They win about 53% of their games as opposed to the 64 with Dak. And they have a 77 passer rating. League average. We often forget that Dallas, more on Green Bay later in this unheard of stretch of great quarterback play they've had since the early 90s. We often forget that Dallas's last three good to great quarterbacks, Aikman, Romo, Dak, Dallas lucked into all of them. Troy Aikman was the number one pick in 1989. We had Dell, he was the number one pick in that draft. Whoever, if it was the Bears who had the first pick or the Lions who had the first pick, Dallas, Aikman was going number one. Dallas just so happened to be the worst team in the league that year. They took him. Duh. Of course you're going to take Troy Aikman. Kind of lucked into that. We're terrible in order to get him. Tony Romo was so good. The Cowboys loved Romo so much in 2003, they didn't draft him because nobody drafted him. Undrafted free agent, and Bill Parcells and Sean Payton, that coaching staff, developed Romo until he eventually became a pretty darn good NFL quarterback, franchise guy. Dak Prescott, Cowboys loved him so much, not only did they not draft him for 3 rounds, they tried to trade up into the first round to go for this guy. Remember this guy's name? Paxton Lynch. They backed into a 4th rounder out of Mississippi State. Worked out pretty well for him. We often forget the fact that before Dak Prescott joined the Dallas Cowboys, they had 5 of their last 6 seasons prior to 2016. They missed the playoffs. And if you include that 6-year stretch from 2010 to 2015, and by the way, Dak inherited a 4-12 team, neither here nor there. If you take those 6 years, take the games that Dak has missed in his career, 54-58, below average, which is by and large what the Cowboys have been over the last 28. Now it's going to be 29 years with this stretch of, forget making a Super Bowl, failing to get to a conference championship game in an NFC that you would not have had a better opportunity as the 2 seed, 16 of your last 16 at home against an inexperienced Packers team. Blame is not absolved of or from Dak Prescott. He deserves a solid chunk of blame. The pick 6 was awful. Awful. The first play, questionable, probably should have been PI. If the ref's going to let that go, that's fine. Let him play. It's the NFL playoffs. I got no issue with that. Second pick to Darnell Savage was a horrendous decision by Dak. Horrible. But how many times during that game, I'm going to roll with the analysis of Greg Olson on Fox during the game. How many times did you watch the game? If you're listening to the sound the way I was, did Greg Olson say, yeah, Dak's just looking for somebody to separate? Like if somebody, Dak's, it's scramble drill, where's somebody getting open? Have I not been saying that all season long with the Cowboys? I've had Dallas as high as I've had them in Bryson's Best 10 every Wednesday. When I rate my top 10 team in the league, the highest Dallas has gone, they've been there for a few weeks now, is number 3, just behind the Ravens and the Niners. You're like, Bryson, why'd you have them at 3? One, because of the roster. You can go back and check those tapes. I never said it was because of the roster, which is, let's be honest, it's fine. It's okay. Really, Deron Bland, first team All-Pro, really? After what he did yesterday and after what DK Metcalf, and anytime he faced an elite receiver, he got cooked. Really, that's a first team All-Pro. And Micah Parsons is Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt. Miss me with that. It's a good roster. They have a great quarterback, a great receiver. Jags across the board from there, just a guy. Ferguson's fine. I like him. And then defensively, a really talented but overly emotional, immature defensive player, Micah Parsons, and then guys after that, especially once Trayvon Diggs went down. And a coach that nobody likes or trusts in Mike McCarthy, who's probably going to be unemployed by the end of the week. I had them at number 3 because of Dak Prescott and because of CeeDee Lamb. Because in today's quarterback-centric league, you need a great quarterback, you need a great receiver. Now, preferably, you'd like to have a good security blanket tight end, which Ferguson's evolved into, props to him. Or you'd like to have a guy in Brandon Cooks who's not, 112th in yards per catch. That'd be nice. Or Jalen Tolbert, who barely played last year. Or Michael Gallup, who played pretty well yesterday, but for the vast majority of the season kind of looked physically shot, unfortunately, off the ACL last year or 2 years ago. My mistake with Dak, here's where I made the mistake. Here's where I was really wrong. I assumed, because I picked the Cowboys to get to the Super Bowl and lose to the Chiefs. More on the Chiefs later, because I feel great about them winning the Super Bowl, that pick. But my mistake, my error, was assuming Dak could take a roster to the Super Bowl. Folks, only 2 guys in the league can do that. One plays in Kansas City, the other plays in Cincinnati. Love Lamar Jackson. He has 1 playoff win. And I think Lamar Jackson's the 3rd best quarterback in the league. Love Lamar Jackson. He has 1 playoff win. Josh Allen, he had Brian Dable in 2021, still couldn't get past the Chiefs. Now, you can probably blame his defense. You can't blame Josh Allen for that game, but you get what I'm saying. Had Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, who's great in the playoffs, great OC years ago. He hasn't put together any incredible run. He's had some pretty good defenses in the past. Throw out any quarterback you want. My guy, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence collapsed at the end of the year. Injured, but still collapsed. 2 guys can take average rosters to long playoff. I mean, what Burrow did in 2021, I've never seen anything like it. That was a horrible offensive line and a pretty average roster. Took it to the Super Bowl. Mahomes last year, his number 1 receiver was Juju Smith-Schuster, led it to the number 1 offensive league. Obviously, Mahomes' greatness doesn't need to be regurgitated today. We're pretty aware of how great that player is. That was my mistake with Dak, is assuming he could take a good coach. I still think McCarthy's a good coach. Not great, not a guy who can win Super Bowls in the modern era, but a good coach. An average defense and a very average skill position group, including CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee's not average. He elevates that roster, or I should say that skill position group, into average. That was my mistake with Dak. Won't be made again. But I'll say this, and then I'll look at the comments, then we'll talk Green Bay. We're about to learn a lot about Dak Prescott in the next couple of months because he holds all the leverage with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys front office. All the leverage. 3 reasons. Number 1, he has 1 year left in his deal. He doesn't have to sign anything he doesn't want to. If Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, Cowboys front office says, hey, here's a contract that's going to pay you, $60 million a year. Dak can turn it down if he wants to, if he doesn't want to continue to waste his career in Dallas. Number 2, his contract says that he signed in 2021. That contract says the Cowboys can't franchise tag him. So the Cowboys, and I hate the franchise tag. The Cowboys cannot sign him to the franchise tag and do a 1-year deal, do like this sort of like half engagement type of thing. Like, they're not going to do that. They can't do that. And third, and maybe most importantly, Dak has a no trade clause. No trade clause. So if the Cowboys want to screw him over and trade him to Carolina or something, he could say, nope, not going to play there. And they can't do that. Be going against his contract. Here's what I would do if I were Dak. First, I would suggest requesting a trade, but that doesn't seem to me to be Dak's kind of the way he goes about things, so that's fine. See who the Cowboys hire at head coach. Bill Belichick, there's been rumors there. Jim Harbaugh. I don't think Harbaugh would ever go to work for Jerry Jones, but just for the sake of argument, Jim Harbaugh, Ben Johnson, there's plenty. Mike Vrabel, like I've talked last week, I cannot believe how great the candidates are. That's why I've said for Philadelphia, at least consider moving off Nick Sirianni. The candidates here are insane. See who they hire, play next year, see how it works out, leave in free agency. Because trust me, you've seen some of the quarterback play with some of these teams. You've seen Pittsburgh, my Steelers quarterback play in Atlanta's. Could sure use them at Dak Prescott. Could sure use them. So blame Dak all you want. Knock yourselves out. But this notion that he's the source of the Cowboys' problems, Cowboys fans, longtime Cowboys fans, remember Quincy Carter? Remember that weird Drew Bledsoe year? Remember Brandon Weeden? Remember that Andy Dalton season when Dak went down? Wasn't too fun, was it? Let go of Dak. You go from playoff frauds and disappointment to irrelevant. If there's one thing I know about Jerry Jones, he wants a Super Bowl his way. The last thing he wants, Jerry Jones could go 0-17. But if the Cowboys don't lose money in terms of their brand, Jerry Jones chilling. Doesn't bother him. You lose Dak, it's over. Trading Dak, while I hope it happens for Dak's sake, would be the worst mistake in the history of Jerry Jones's career in Dallas outside of firing Jimmy Johnson, which was an infinitely worse mistake because Jerry let his pride get the best of him and fired one of the best coaches we've ever seen. You see Jimmy Johnson at halftime at Fox? My Lord, he's 80 years old. I want to play for him right now. I've never played football in my life. I want to go play for Jimmy Johnson. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.